Elon Musk builds rockets. You build buildings. So why listen to an hour on how Elon thinks? Because underneath the Mars stuff, he's a guy who's solved impossible problems over and over again in a variety of industries. And the reason why is because he has a very clear way of thinking about how to solve problems and build great companies. My guest, Eric Jorgenson, has put all of that thinking into the Book of Elon. And the one thing that stood out to me is how Elon looks at solving problems from the perspective of what he calls the algorithm. And it is the algorithm that we are going to be exploring for the next hour on Construction Genius. I know you're going to find this tremendously helpful. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Eric, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you for having me back, fellow Eric.
Hey, Eric with a C. You know, one thing I hate about Gmail is that when I'm dictating into it and an email and I sign it off with Eric, it always does Eric with a K, and I have no idea how to autocorrect that. So it stopped doing that. It really frustrates me.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. We're spelling it right. What do you think in Gmail?
I know, man. Come on. All right. So you've spent thousands of hours pulling Elon Musk's ideas out of interviews, tweets, and transcripts, and you've compiled that in the Book of Elon. I had a great time reading it. After all that immersion, what's risen to the top? What are the few ideas you think actually carry weight, not just in the world of rockets and electric cars, but in the world of construction?
Yeah, the book is chock full of them. I mean, it's probably a list 50 long, and I really try to make it rich and dense so that there's something useful on every single page. If I had to kind of bucket it into kind of like the personal side of things and the professional side, on the personal side, I would say the overarching thing that Elon shows us is just that we are capable of a lot more than we think. I think he's special, but I don't think he's superhuman. And the career that he's had in a bunch of different industries and the amount of risk that he's taken and the amount of seemingly impossible problems that he's solved, I find very inspiring. And I think kind of helps us all lift our gaze to bigger problems and greater things. In the professional side, I think the algorithm is probably the one. If I had to narrow it down, like that encompasses sort of 5 steps of just like really high quality thinking to improve, a process or a product. And of those 5 steps, the first 2 are really, in my view, 80% of the weight. And those first 2 steps are just question the requirements and delete as many steps as you can. And I think if you become really, really clever and disciplined and thorough about questioning requirements and deleting the unnecessary, you will find unbelievable efficiencies and advantages that pay themselves off surprising multiple of times.
Okay, excellent. I want to come back to the algorithm and explore that, and we'll explain that in some more detail. I'd like to go back to the personal side in brief here. You stated that you're capable of a lot more than you think. And in reading the book, 3 things stood out to me that I would say are elemental or fundamental to success. And those 3 things are hard work, intelligence, and then courage. And Elon, the way he's talked about those is hard work is common, intelligence is uncommon, but courage is rare. In terms of achieving more than we think, how do those 3 things, hard work, intelligence, and courage, come into play, do you think?
Yeah, I think if I recall correctly, that was Naval's way of describing Elon in his foreword. Yes. And I think that it's a pretty good way to describe Elon. We all know, almost everybody we know is working hard. Like if you're here listening to a podcast about work in your free time that you don't have to be, you're a hard worker.
Yes.
Most people I know are working 50, 60, 70-hour weeks as a default. They're ambitious, they're hardworking, they're honorable. But not everybody's having these unbelievable outsized returns. A lot of people are smart. I do think Naval is correct that courage is rare. Not just the courage to do something hard and unique, but to take unbelievable amount of risk. and to risk public embarrassment, to risk losing a generational fortune, to risk failure on a really grand and public scale over and over and over again over a long period of time. I think if you're going to do one of these things, if you're going to tackle one of these problems, it seems impossible or even unprecedented, right? Like if you just picture a large development or a big building or a new type of construction that, you might not have dabbled in before, it's intimidating and it's unprecedented. But of course, it's not impossible. Nobody considers it impossible. But the courage to taking those leaps is the thing that over time separates people with completely average careers and outcomes from people with these top 1%, tenth of a percent, hundredth of a percent outcomes. And Elon is just the outliers among the outliers. I mean, he's the wealthiest person alive and maybe the greatest entrepreneur to ever live. So I don't put these forth to say like, go follow his life plan, start an electric car company and be him.
Yep.
Merely to say there's something certainly to learn from this person who's lived such a unique experience and has learned so many lessons the hard way. He's not a charismatic speaker particularly, and he doesn't go out of his way to teach these things. But when he does share them in the talks that he gives, I think they're extremely useful in putting them down in writing and just making them clear and accessible to people. Hopefully I think people get a lot of value from it.
That's funny you say that, because that's one thing I've noticed about him is like, he doesn't strike you when he speaks as someone hyper intelligent, because we often associate hyper intelligence with clarity and ease of speaking. And he's definitely not always the clearest nor the easiest of speakers to listen to. So I find that kind of interesting. I'm curious about this idea of risk, because you mentioned a couple of things. And one thing that construction company CEOs are rightly concerned with is risk. The primary risk that they always want to avoid is threatening the lives or risking the lives of the people who are building their projects, either through injury or, God forbid, through death. And so there's an appropriate risk aversion in construction that is very, very important. However, focusing on this idea of public embarrassment even, I think it's interesting to think about how much more successful would someone be if they didn't care what other people thought about them.
It's so funny how much of timeless wisdom just sort of comes back to that, right? Like, we're told it countless times in countless ways our entire lives, and yet we're still such mimetic monkeys.
Right.
With this kind of deep subconscious fear of being shunned out of the tribe, and that'll result in death, just because of our evolution and our genetics, that it's a really difficult thing to overcome.
Yep. It would be interesting for the folks listening here is to make a list of imagined risks and then real risks. And then number one, do your best not to be driven by those imagined risks. And when you're looking at the real risks, to force rank those in such a way that you're not allowing the ones that have minimal impact over time to hinder you in the things that you're looking to do in your business.
Yeah, I think Elon has a great line about fear, which is when you look directly at it, it disappears. And I think risk and fear are sort of intermingled. Like if we're able to really fully quantify the fear of specific risks that we have and identify the sort of the cascading things of like, what is a 1% chance that this happens, and the 1% of the 1% where someone is injured or killed, and then the 1% of that 1% where those, that affects my ability to raise capital or hire or finish this project, and then then my family's doing, like, we catastrophize, we overemphasize, and we feel the emotional pain of the worst of the worst imaginable scenarios, even though there's a lot of things that you could do along the way to mitigate it. There's a lot of reasons why it wouldn't go that way. And so Elon's optimism is, I think, one of his superpowers is just kind of asking what could go right.
Yes.
Yes. Maybe there's only a 10% chance of success.
Yes.
But the value of that success is, we will have done the impossible. We'll have done something that's never been done before. And so I'll take a 90% chance of failure because there's 1,000x payoff on the upside. In his case, it's like 1,000,000x or 10 millionx payoff on the upside.
And that's interesting because I think he frames his thinking in the way that you've put it in the book here, very much in terms of the impact of his decisions on society at large. And therefore, he's willing to be beyond himself, and being able to look beyond himself puts him in a position to take those risks, whereas someone who's perhaps more self-centered and concerned about more I mean, temporal things such as I want to make sure I have enough money in the bank to be able to retire in the way that Americans typically retire. That kind of thinking can really keep you from making decisions that could actually have a much wider benefit than just yourself.
100%. I think the subtitle of this book is A Guide to Purpose and Success.
Right.
I think one of the underrated things about Elon is that all the decisions he's making are very principled and driven by a vision to elevate humanity and move, the sort of the frontiers of human progress. I think that's a big part of why he's able to recruit some of the most talented engineers in the world. It's part of the reason why he has so many absolute diehard investors and fans and supporters. And you don't have to take humanity to Mars to take advantage of this insight, right? Everybody knows that you'd rather work for somebody who's trying to make a really positive impact in the community than to go on another vacation and retire a few years earlier. Yeah. Like those aren't company values that make people excited to show up early, stay late, and go that extra mile. But if they know they're building something that's going to be around their community for hundreds of years, or that's going to be an unprecedented benefit to their local town or whatever it is, you get a different level of effort out of people. It's the parable about one person's building a wall and one person's building a cathedral.
Yeah.
And the only difference is like, what's the story about the work that's happening? And I think that's a universal. It's a universal desire for people to be a part of something bigger than themselves and make their work meaningful. And all work is meaningful with the right story.
Yeah, see, that's right. And that's one of the wonderful things, obviously, about being in construction is that you are actually building things buildings that people live in and work in, and roads that people use, and you're transforming not only the communities that you live in, but the lives of the people who work for you and with you. And that's tremendously important. I want to go back to this idea of the fears that we have and how we even transmit those to other people. And I was thinking in terms of how we counsel younger people in terms of their career. And one thing that I always tell younger people is that in your 20s, for instance, that is the time to be trying stuff out. And trying a career over here, a career over there, go to this company, go to that company. If it doesn't work, who cares? If you fail, who cares? Because you're building knowledge, you're building experience, you're building skills. And so we want to give people the permission to try things out, to experiment, to try and expand their experiences without putting on them that fear of failure, which often inhibits people's success.
I couldn't agree more. I'm actually currently writing an essay about what the biggest companies in the world, the $1 trillion babies, what the biggest companies in the world look like in their earliest stages. And I think it's more common than not that they're in their 20s, if not teens, when they start these companies. It is a very surprising trend. And the compounding learning that you get when you are sort of, as Naval would say, like accountable for your performance,
yes.
Exposed to the upside and the downside, you learn at a different level, you perform at a different level starting much earlier, and you start building a track record much earlier. The nature of compounding is by the time you're 30 or 40, you've got 10 or 20 years of experience where other people might just be setting off to start their own companies they're at day one, yes. Even though they've been in the industry for 20 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to go then to this idea of the algorithm, and it's on page 130 of your book. And guys, here's the book. If you're watching the video, you got to go out and get the book. It's awesome. Let's dive into that. I'm going to give the 5 parts of the algorithm, and then I want you to help me understand it. So the first one is make your requirements less dumb. That sounds like Elon. 2, try very hard to delete the part or process. Number 3 is simplify or optimize. Number 4 is accelerate. And number 5 is automate. And he makes the point that beginning with number 5 is wrong. Trying to think about how can we automate is not the right way to go about it. You have to do the steps in the right order. So can we start with number 1, make your requirements less dumb?
Yes. This one is very interesting. And I should say, this was it sounds obvious when you sort of hear it this way.
Yeah.
And the reason that he articulated this and it's up on the walls and that he repeats it thousands of times to all of his teams and all of his companies is because our bias is almost always to do the opposite. And he says, I've gone exactly backwards on many, many, many times. I've tried to automate something to make it go away. And then I've tried to make it go faster. And then I've tried to optimize it. And then I ended up deleting it because I didn't question the requirements in the first place. And that is a lesson where you're like, oh my God, I spent millions of dollars and months of time trying to solve a problem that didn't even need to exist in the first place if I would have just thought harder about it up front and done more research about sort of the problem frame. And so the first part about making your requirements less dumb, I'm sure everybody listening to this has hours and days and weeks and months and years of their life put into like, oh my God, the regulations, the inspections, the requirements, the safety checks, the materials, the spec, the client demands, the bank's demands, like the insurance demands, all of this huge list of requirements to meet everybody's various demands about these projects that of course slows down and makes everything more expensive and introduces additional risk. And so one of Elon's superpowers is actually reducing and eliminating those requirements, which a lot of people tend to take as a given, right? Like, oh, well, we have to pass the city inspection. We have to follow the zoning laws. We have to acquiesce the bank's demands or whatever. And he will actually invest a surprising amount of time and effort into making those requirements malleable. And so if he sees a law that's stupid and doesn't actually protect, the consumer, he'll dispatch somebody or he'll call the regulator and say, look, I understand the intent of this law is X. It doesn't achieve it. It makes me slower and it makes the product more expensive. And it's actually counterproductive for these following reasons. Like, can I have a waiver? Can you ignore it? Can we have in writing that you won't enforce it? Can you change it? Whatever it is. And sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not. And sometimes the answer is to not follow the law and pay the price after. The cheaper thing to do is to violate it and come up with it later.
Can I just stop you there? Because you bring up an important point that he makes again and again, and you make in the book and the way you've compiled it, is this idea of if you're looking at something that you want to change and changing it does not violate the laws of physics, then there's a tremendous possibility that it can actually get changed. And he frames a lot of this, his engineering thinking and his solving of problems around this sort of first principles perspective of starting with the laws of physics. And if it doesn't violate the laws of physics, then there's something we can do about it.
Absolutely. It's a really useful way to sort of question the assumptions. We all have a tendency to look at the quote unquote best practice, right? Yes. What's the best practice in this space? Or who's doing it well now? Or how did we do it last time? Or who's done it well in my city? Who already knows how to do this? And starting with the status quo as the basis for improvement. And, it's very reasonable to look at the status quo and say, oh, we can improve this by 5%, 10%. But what Elon does...
reasoning, now that would be reasoning by analogy. That's what you pointed out in the book, correct?
Yeah. And it's easiest to explain first principles by first explaining reasoning by analogy.
Yes.
So what most people do is kind of start with the current best practice. And what Elon does is start with what is the maximum possible efficiency according to the laws of physics. Like, what is the theoretically perfect solution to this? And then start with that. And of course, you're not going to do it, right? But if you question every assumption between the current best practice status quo and what's theoretically perfect, that's where these like radical innovations come from.
Yes.
This is where you get to make improvements to processes that other people are absolutely shocked and blindsided by, because we tend to consider whatever's current as like the best possible. This, like, if you're familiar with like the efficient market hypothesis, right? Like these guys won a Nobel Prize for basically noticing that the stock market's really efficient. But of course, there's plenty of people outperforming the stock market all the time. Yep. And it's inefficient in millions of ways that we just haven't figured out yet.
Yep.
And so rejecting that entirely and trying to put yourself through some of these creative thought exercises is like, why not? Right. And so, one of his great observations is like the value of time,
yes.
like the fundamental cost of time, and how many different things become more expensive because you're only working an 8-hour shift instead of a 12-hour shift or a 16-hour shift or even a 24-hour shift. And so most of his factories and sites and things like this, he's like, I put up a camera and I want to see this site look like a beehive 24 hours a day. Because anytime that we're not making forward progress on this rocket, like we're burning, the entire burn rate of the company is dependent on whether or not this project is making progress.
Yes.
And so actively managing that bottleneck, and he both personally and at his companies is just incredibly effective with his, what I think of as like the full use of time and a really deep respect for time as the fundamental kind of limiter in this unbelievably expensive thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the way to state that simply is the way that he thinks is I can always find more money or make more money, but I can't find more time or make more time. Time is that constant that's always on the move.
The most interesting thing about this, I'm sure the industry is sort of pervasive with the classic trilemma, right? It can be fast, cheap, or good.
Yes.
Choose two.
Yes.
And I think what Elon has shown us a few times is that fast is actually cheap.
Right.
It breaks the trilemma. If you are fast and efficient and high quality, you can be cheaper basically only because you are sufficiently fast. And some of that speed comes from, the questioning of the requirements and the deleting, which are, those first two steps of the algorithm.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's an example in the book about the battery cost where people assumed EV batteries would always cost around $600 a kilowatt hour. And by doing an analogy, reasoning by analogy there might say, well, how can I cut it by 10%? And then you're kind of playing around the margins or maybe building a better robot to build the EV batteries. But what he did is he broke down the actual physical inputs into the battery and asked how much those cost, like the cobalt and the nickel and the carbon and all those kinds of things. And the gap there was $80 per kilowatt hour versus $600. And so by starting at that point, he was able to begin to design or engineer a solution that was much more cost effective.
Yeah, this is what he calls the idiot index.
Yes.
Right? Is the difference between the idiot index is the difference between the raw material of the part and the price that you paid for it. So one story in his world is like this piece of steel that was like this half nozzle jacket. And they were paying $13,000 to some supplier, some aerospace supplier for the part. And he goes in and asks the engineer, like, what's the value of the raw material of the components? And it's just a piece of steel. And the engineer was like, oh, a few $1,000. And he's like, wrong. It's a few $100.
Right.
So we're paying 20x for what? And so that 20x, that's the idiot index, right? And so he says, like, this is a stupid part. Somebody in the supply chain is an idiot and you're stupid for paying this price. So go find a cheaper way to mold a few $100 worth of steel into the shape that we need it to be. And once you start to see this, you kind of look around and you're like, oh, yeah. I look at an air conditioning unit and I'm like, there's no fucking way I could get those atoms in that order for cheaper than a few $1,000.
Yes.
Like, that breaks my brain.
Yep.
But when lumber prices are crazy, it's like, oh, well, there's trees on this lot and I got a chainsaw and a planer. Like, I can make my own lumber for way cheaper than they're charging me at the lumber yard. So like, maybe I should just start making my own 2x4s. This is this mindset. And once you see it, you kind of see it everywhere. And a lot of times you'll find people, just how capital efficient can you be and how fast can you be is like really the core of almost all great organizations. You see clever people buying stuff, from unconventional sources or moving unconventionally quickly due to just incisiveness, just seeing more clearly what needs to be done and finding what seems like a shortcut until you're like, oh, that's just smart. That's just clever.
Yeah, it's interesting, that idea of atoms, again, going to this idea of first principles and not violating the laws of physics. We can get down to the atomic level and think about reordering things. And by that reordering, create new processes, new products, new systems, all those kinds of things. But it's the ability to think at that level that really is essential. And that comes down then to a practice, I would imagine, where if you don't think that way by habit or naturally, you have to train yourself to do that. Do you think that's possible for someone to at least begin down that path?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. And I think, for Elon wasn't born like this. He has some advantage in that he was raised in like a very engineering household and he's been smart and incisive since he was a kid. But he picked up manufacturing starting at like age 30. He was a software guy exclusively until starting SpaceX and Tesla. And so, he kind of jokes like, I didn't study rocket science. I just picked it up along the way. But he picked it up by buying all the textbooks and reading all of them. And then talking to people. And, especially if you're a leader, you train the organization in how you want to see things done. And so when he's doing these technical reviews and he'll tell his engineers, like, you better know every part in your system by the idiot index. I want to see a rank ordered basically by the margin we're paying somebody else, because that's our targeting system for inefficiency.
Yes.
From a capital point of view.
Yes.
Right?
Think about the last time you promoted someone into a leadership role and it failed. Why did it fail? I can tell you one reason. People know how to build projects, but they don't know how to build and lead teams of people. Construction comes with its challenges that only insiders truly understand. Generic leadership training doesn't cut it. You need a program to train your leaders built specifically for construction professionals led by an industry expert. And my online course, The Shift, is exactly that course. It has 5 modules. It'll teach your people how to control their calendars and reduce stress and embrace chaos and accomplish their critical tasks. It will teach them the 3 essential messages they have to communicate every day in order to motivate and lead their team effectively. It'll show them how to build and lead a high-performing team, give them a framework for running effective meetings so they'll be able to solve problems in less than an hour, and also give them a higher perspective on their leadership that will enable them to work on the business and on their teams and not get stuck in the weeds micromanaging. So go out to my website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, read all about the course, and then enroll yourself and your leaders in the course, and I guarantee that it will transform your leadership. If it does not, you take the whole course and you didn't get benefit from it, you just send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, and I will cheerfully refund you 100% of your money. I'm really confident this course will transform your leadership. So again, go out to the website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, learn more about the course, and start taking it today.
So inefficiency is rife all across construction. And I don't know if we're going to come up with an answer to this, but it's something for folks to explore. It seems like one of Elon's ways of dealing with the inefficiencies is questioning the requirements, reordering the atoms, but then also taking on in the companies themselves a lot of the manufacturing responsibilities. So in other words, he makes the analogy of the Ford Motor Company being sort of an outsourcer of all these things, and they just kind of assemble stuff. But Tesla's got a different perspective where they're doing much more of the manufacturing themselves, not just the assembly. Did I pick that up correctly?
Yeah, and I imagine this is a pain that everyone is familiar with. He says when you inherit a legacy supply chain,
yes,
you inherit the constraints of the legacy supply chain. And so if you're trying to build an innovative car company, but you're using all the same suppliers as Ford on the same schedule and at the same and at worse prices because your volume will be lower, of course you're going to get your ass kicked and you can't do anything interesting or innovative. And so he sort of kept running into these blocks. And it's not, in some cases, I think he vertically integrated out of a desire to decrease cost. In some cases, it was because he couldn't get anybody else to make the part or make it fast enough.
Right.
And whatever the bottleneck is, you have to attack that bottleneck. And in some cases, he worked closely with suppliers to develop key capabilities that did make sense for them to make, rather than Tesla. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in those decisions.
It's interesting. It makes me think of this company called Katera, which they failed in the construction space, but what they tried to do is become a fully vertically integrated construction company with off-site construction as well to make the on-site construction more efficient. They didn't succeed, but it's a problem that the construction industry is definitely always trying to make progress on, this idea of efficiency, which is so difficult to achieve in construction in many ways.
I made an investment in a company that I think is a very good first principles construction company. And so it's a company called Terran Robotics, and they built this very cheap robotic, like a cable gantry system that comes on the back of a truck and pops up in a lot. And it builds Adobe walls with windows, builds any Adobe structure you want with a very cheap robot using the clay and the mud and the material that is already on the site. And this replaces framing and drywall, and it replaces, I think, 4 trades with one cheap robot with material that's already on site. And it just simplifies dramatically the construction process. And it was just one of these kind of first principles things of of course we can truck in less materials. Of course we can consolidate trades into one vendor essentially. And of course, a cable robot is an incredibly cheap way to do this relative to some of the other solutions I've seen around. And so I think it's very interesting. There's a lot of opportunity for this in the construction world, I think.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So going back to the algorithm, number 1 is make your requirements less dumb. Number 2, try very hard to delete the part or process. And so that's very much not accepting things the way that they are and not even trying to make it 5% better. There's this principle of deletion. And one thing that he notices, that he mentions that I think is important, is if we're not adding back in stuff that we've deleted, that means we haven't deleted enough stuff. Can you talk about that, please?
It's a very good test because it's a little counterintuitive.
Yes.
Going back to like the risk that you spoke about, like everybody's worst nightmare is a house that you built falling down on somebody's head. And the natural response to that is to over-engineer, to build and just make absolutely damn sure that there's nothing that could ever happen that where this house is going to fall down or where this thing's going to break. But it also means that it's not a very elegant solution. It's not a very simple design. You haven't really questioned deeply the requirements and the absolute necessity of each part in the system. And I don't know, everybody will have their own version of this, but I had this sort of experience a few times myself of like addition by subtraction.
Yeah.
When you remove something
Yes.
that you're a little nervous to remove.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden everything is better.
Yes.
You let go of one person and you're like, oh man, like we're going to lose this and this, but I think on balance is better. And you lose that person or let them go. And all of a sudden, not only did you save the money, but everybody else is happier.
Yes.
And all the work is happening more smoothly. And you're like, how is it so invisible to me that like, everything is better on the other side of this decision? And deleting parts and process steps is the same way.
Yes.
The gains are unbelievable. It is an alchemic process when you delete something that costs time and money, and nothing is worse and everything is better, and then the entire timeline is sped up and you save the cost along the way.
Yep. And I think this again speaks to this idea of humility that I also pick up in the book a lot. And you get this idea of humility in not being afraid to fail, but then also humility in saying, okay, so let's say I say we want to delete this and this. And then a month later, I've got to come back and say, guys, 2 of the things that we deleted, we shouldn't have deleted. We need to put them back in. That humility, that willingness to take risks, but also admit when you're wrong, it seems like that's fundamental to driving real change and being successful.
Yeah, I think we all have this fear of like the thing that we're responsible for breaking, and it leads to this over-engineering like chronically. And so changing the culture to be like, it's actually the gains to successfully deleting something are so big.
Yes.
And so difficult to conceive of if you're not used to doing it, if you don't have this cultural habit of deleting and appreciating the fact that you deleted something.
Yep.
It's a tough thing to train people in. And this is why he has to say it so many times. One of his great quotes, I think, is the most common mistake of a smart engineer is to optimize something that shouldn't exist.
That's a good one. It's interesting because, so I got to cover this because this pops up. One of the concepts, and we'll continue through the algorithm, but I want to bring this up. One of the concepts that really hit home well for me is this idea of great answers to bad questions that result in bad ideas. And so the idea here is, if I can ask better questions, I'm going to get better answers that will lead to better ideas. So bad ideas don't necessarily come because people are stupid. They come because the wrong questions are being asked up front. Can we explore that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I think both of these early steps in the algorithm and the third in large part are designed to get people to ask the right question.
Right.
And the right question in the big picture is, how do we design the most elegant overall product or the most elegant overall process or system? How do we deliver the best thing to the customer for the cheapest, the most reliably?
Yes.
And what happens in practicality is that everyone's sort of given responsibility for a small thing. And so the canonical story for this in the Model 3 is that there's a battery team who's responsible for like the battery and the battery packaging. And of course, the battery team puts the battery in a box with a lid.
Right.
And so and then like has to glue a thing on top of the lid and then push that into the chassis.
Yep.
And Elon comes along and says like, why does this battery have a lid on it?
Yes.
And the battery team's like, wow, your battery needs a lid. I don't know. He said, why do you need a lid? There's a car on top of it. And they're like, oh, all right, I guess it doesn't do it. And so you delete this part, you delete the parts, the robots and the people that are doing that in the process. You delete the mass from the vehicle, you delete the cost of the raw material from the vehicle. And over time, that decision is probably worth tens of millions of dollars in the combination of raw material and manufacturing time. It is a really fascinating thing. And so looking at your sort of org structure, right? Yeah. I mean, the same thing could happen with like the team that's designing the brakes is choosing one metal, but it turns out that the metal that they choose that's optimal for their set of engineering trade-offs, once it's put in the wheel assembly, and interacts with the other metals is actually corrosive. And so, okay, now what do? We've got these two corrosive metals because we've got two different teams that made optimal decisions within their subsystem, but they weren't communicating. They weren't sort of working from this larger view of the system and the product that they're trying to solve. And the same thing can happen, when you got people in an office versus people on a site, or people designing the product in CAD versus people on the manufacturing line. And so these sort of like seams exist all over every organization, every product. And part of the leader's goal and mission is to just break those things down, put those people in the same room, get them talking directly, get people to have a broad purview of the product or the process that they're trying to solve, and just make smarter trade-offs for the end customer all along the way.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this in terms of construction. And in construction, there's three main things we got to do. We got to get the work, we got to plan the work, and then we got to build the work. And I was thinking about this framework in terms of the question of, for instance, how can we get more work, right? And so the wrong question is, how do we win more work? Because the smart answer would be bid more jobs, sharpen your numbers, chase more opportunities. And then you get a bad idea, which is growth comes from pursuing more projects, but those projects aren't necessarily the ones that you can actually build profitably. So the better question is, which projects, clients, and locations give us the best chance to build safely, efficiently, with quality, and make money? And then from that, the answer can be defining your ideal project profile, winning those projects, and then the idea that you get is win the work that we can win twice. First when we sell it, but then also when we build it in the field.
And you're probably more likely to win the work that you have a demonstrable track record of delivering on and making everybody happy with.
Yep.
And so you're targeting opportunities that you're more likely to convert on anyway, and less likely to be wasting time up front chasing things that don't fit your profile.
Yep. Or another way is this, right? Is when we're talking about building work in the field, you might be asking, how do we push the field to go faster, right? And that's really the wrong question. The better question is, what is slowing safe, high quality production in the field?
Yeah.
Right. And if you get the better question, then you get a better answer, which then leads to a good idea. And that's the key here. Get great questions. You'll then get really good answers, and then question and answer together. That's the idea. Then go execute on that idea.
In that context, I think another Elon's like, go physically to wherever the problem is immediately.
Right.
Like if the thing that is slowing you down is the building of the work, get your ass to that site and go see what's going on. In Elon's world, it's walking the line. So walking the production line, and there's green and red lights. And so he just says, walk to the red. Like whenever there's, something that's, you see parts pile up, or you see a red light, you see things slowing down, you see the bottleneck developing, you go there and you call a flash mob, and you gather all the people that might have a hand in solving this thing, and you start running it down as quickly as you possibly can. So tackling that bottleneck is, I think, one of his secret sauces. He's a very unconventional CEO in that sense.
Yes.
Where he's not running, the cadence of the organization and the weekly stand-ups and this and that. He's just sort of attacking the bottleneck wherever it is, the technical product development bottleneck, wherever it is in his organizations at any given time. And I do mean at any given time, like 1 a.m., 3 a.m., he goes and he sits with the engineers working on the problem and gets on the whiteboard with them. And he has sort of an escalating process with this, where like if it's a normal bottleneck or whatever, he's meeting weekly with the engineers that are on the team to apply the algorithm. And if it's a really expensive, painful bottleneck, he meets daily or every 12 hours. And so this unrelenting attacks on the bottleneck that are really slowing progress are the truly key next steps to break through.
Yeah. So a couple of different things there. Identify the bottlenecks and go to those. And it is counterintuitive, because there's another school of thought that you're the CEO and you're above it all, and you're moving the pawns or the pieces around the chessboard. And Elon's thought is, no, I'm actually on the chessboard and I'm going to go right to that problem. But then this idea of flash mob, I really like that. It's this idea of bringing everyone together. And I know there's a thought in the book about getting intelligent people working on a problem together obviously expands the ability of coming up with some of those great ideas, because you have more bandwidth, so to speak, or more brain power from different individuals working on those problems.
Yeah, I think there's a limit to probably how good that is. Like if you get people that are too far away.
Yes.
But if they're the people who like might have a hand in that solution, who are trained kind of in the algorithm, who are incisive, and have good thoughts about like what could be deleted. And the closer they are to the front lines, a lot of times the better. There's people on site that probably have great ideas about what's causing the slowdowns, and they'd be happy to tell you because nobody's rooting for the slowness. And if they do, that's an incentives problem.
So that's another thing right there is like, again, with construction specifically, the CEOs, many of them have started in the field and they've built the business and they're now in the office and their boots are no longer dirty, and they can be forgetting that go get those boots dirty, go talk to the foreman, go talk to the operator, find out where that bottleneck is and see what you can do to solve that problem. And it's really interesting and kind of neat in a certain way, because we all know in construction, as we're building projects, these bottlenecks come up. And if you're thinking in terms of bottlenecks, then that can help you to be much more efficient in how you're using your time, because you're focusing all the time on those issues.
Yeah, my sort of distillation of some of his magic is that he is working on the right thing, which is the bottleneck,
yes,
at the right time, which is right now,
yes,
all the time, which is like the third thing, which is how hard he works. But the most important thing is actually his like intuitive targeting system for what the most important problem is to work on at any given time.
Yes.
And his bias to urgency for sorting it out.
Yes.
He's not like, we'll wait for the next team meeting to do that. He's like, no, I'm calling that guy right now. And I want a progress update in 2 hours. Like, patience for anything, especially the closer it is to this bottleneck, this critical path, as people say.
Yes.
The faster it has to move and the sooner you need to check in on it as a CEO.
Yeah. And so that goes to another aspect of the way he's built his businesses is obviously in any business, there's silos, but he insists on doing everything we can to remove those silos by reducing the amount of command and control within those silos as it relates to communication between the silos. And so permission is given for anyone to speak to anyone about any issue with the view in mind of wanting to solve those issues.
Well, 100%. I mean, sort of famous change for him was like putting the engineering designers in the factory. Yes. Like their desks are in the factory next to the part of the production line that they're designing for. And so they have to watch the manufacturers, the people actually working on the line, deal with their parts and actually, get them in the car and get them installed. And those people working on the line can grab a designer and be like, why the hell did you do this? This is fucking stupid.
Yep.
You're making our lives difficult. If you turn this whole thing 90 degrees, I can reach the bolt and my assembly time will go down by 80%. And those are really interesting breakthroughs that like, how would you possibly as CEO see those? But those million little improvements, in the construction analogy might be like, if you got somebody working on parts and supply chain ordering, your buyer, like get them a laptop and get them a folding table and put them on the site.
Yes.
And massively increase the bandwidth of communication between the people actually on site and the people like quote unquote in the office who are supplying the people on site.
Yep.
If you 10x, 20x their communication bandwidth, if you make them more comfortable talking to each other, if they talk to each other every hour instead of every day or every day instead of every week, your hold up, what parts are available and when it arrives and all that stuff is going to drop dramatically like magic. All you have to make is one decision to change a structure that'll increase their communication bandwidth.
Yeah, I want to go to this idea of meetings as well, because this is part of this idea of solving the problems. Obviously, every company is inundated with meetings. Construction companies are inundated with meetings. And in many meetings, it's just an exchange of information. And there's so many people in the meetings that either shouldn't be there or could make a different contribution if the meeting was more focused. And I think in construction, one of the things that we should really be focusing on is this idea of making every meeting count by centering the meeting around the bottlenecks that exist on the projects that we're building and getting the right people in the room to address those bottlenecks. And if the people in the room are not doing that, they shouldn't be there. They should be doing something else.
Yeah, John McNeil wrote a great book. He was the president of Tesla for quite a few years. It happened to have come out the exact same day as my book. It's called The Algorithm. It is also a great read. I recommend them both as a pair. He's got a bunch of great case studies in there from Tesla and a bunch of different companies as well about applying this. And he's like, the first few minutes of the meeting, all the meetings that I run are like, frame this up. What is the decision that we're trying to make? Or what's the solution that we're trying to come to? And let's go around and say who belongs in this. If this is the scope of this meeting, who belongs in this room? And if we can give you back your time, you should be glad to get out of here and we should be glad to see you go. Because, otherwise we're wasting your hourly rate.
Yep.
And we don't have time for that. So build that culture that's like, you got something more important to do, go do it.
Yep. I love it.
All right, quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is what I want you to do. Go to Amazon, search for the book, read all of the 5-star reviews, because there's a ton of them. Over 50 to be precise. And the reason I want you to read them is because real people wrote those reviews who've actually read the book. And it'll give you an idea of why you should go and buy a copy right now on Amazon. And here's the deal. If you purchase 10 or more copies for your company, and then send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, I'll come in via Zoom and do a 1-hour Q&A and a bonus training session with your team at no charge. I normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. And again, for you, I'll do it at no charge if you buy 10 or more copies of my book. And the reason you should buy it is all in the title. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're in the construction industry, this book is for you. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Audible in the audio version as well, narrated by yours truly. And I know you'll really enjoy it. So go out and get the book. And now back to the interview.
We've hit on a lot of what I wanted to talk about. Just to go through the rest of the algorithm, after we've deleted, we're simplifying or optimizing, and then we're accelerating, and then we're automating.
Yeah, I mean, accelerate, simplify, and optimize is kind of the most common thing people try to do. That's more standard engineering work. There's a lot of simplification, a lot of optimization to do. That's an iterative process. It's easier to do when you've appropriately deleted and questioned requirements. Accelerate is a good one, and specifically accelerate cycle time. So that's the difference between touch time and cycle time is explored a little bit in John's book, The Algorithm, and I think it was a helpful kind of mental model for me. But just making things go faster, back to what we talked about, the fundamental value of time and breaking that trilemma. You can always go faster. Once you're going the right direction and you're doing it in an efficient way, you can always go faster. And then automate is once you know you're doing the right thing in the most elegant way possible, and it's simple and it's optimized and you're doing it as fast as you can. Okay, now it makes sense to go through the pain and expense of automating it because it's less likely to change.
Yes.
Because you're not doing a bunch of obviously stupid things, and you know for sure that it's something that you should be doing and that you're doing it elegantly. Going back to, the original, the Fremont factory, which is where Elon, sort of famously made this mistake. He's he went into his first auto factory saying, all right, we're going to automate everything.
Right.
And he's we invested tens of millions of dollars in robotics, and basically we got it wrong most of the time. The robots were doing the wrong thing. We didn't need a bunch of them. And so now it's a cultural sort of practice to do things by hand first in spreadsheets and pencil and paper in the software design space. And then gradually, as those things get simplified and optimized and done more quickly, the automation, sort of the infrastructure grows around it. And you do want to keep marching that forward. Otherwise, you're working on pencil and paper forever. But there's stories of a few years of spreadsheets before an actual, a full homegrown ERP gets implemented. But by the time it does, it's extremely well informed, and they basically nail it the first time because there's so much intelligence that went into that design process.
Yeah. And it's interesting. If you're going to run the algorithm, though, it's going to be painful.
Yeah. I think it's hard mental work up front. And
that's what I mean.
Yeah, you got to make your brain sweat almost.
Yes.
You've got to get used to that kind of that kind of challenge. Don't just take the first answer. That process of questioning requirements and sometimes spending weeks or months on the process of questioning requirements and trying to delete things.
Yes.
And sometimes you won't be able to delete it, and
right.
It'll feel like you've wasted time. But every time you do delete something, it's going to be unbelievably high payoff. And if you're one of the few people thinking like this, I think in this space, you'll be able to offer an extremely differentiated product or service just because so few people can think like this. And this is where great innovations can come.
Yeah. And so that's the argument that we're making here, is that it may not work every time, or it may not produce exactly what you want every time, but it's the thought process itself that is described in that algorithm that we went through that will help you to really question the way that you're running your business, and through that questioning process, help to improve the way you're running your business.
Yeah, and this doesn't have to be radical business model renovation breakthrough. You may be doing all the right things, but there's 30 to 50% efficiency gains to be picked up all over the place by being oh, wait, we do this on a weekly cadence. Why don't we do this the minute it comes in? We'll pick up 3 days every time it happens.
Yes.
And it doesn't take much more time.
Yes.
My team is running this with a book publishing running the algorithm on a book publishing process. And we're picking up time and efficiency all over the place. What are the things that customers, John, this is again from John's book.
Yep.
Again, they make an incredible pair. I really strongly recommend both.
I just ordered it, by the way.
Good. Yeah, great. I mean, he's got this exercise of like map your process.
Yep.
And I want you to use different color sticky notes on everything that customers pay you to do. And different colors for things that are just either obligations, internal tracking, whatever, legal reporting, everything that just feels like the muck. And that helps you triage the importance of them and how much you should spend and where to question those requirements. And it just is a funny example, like when it comes to questioning requirements, like one of the things they were trying to innovate on at some point, I love both of these stories are in his book. I'm going to sell more copies of his book than mine here.
Yeah, right. Link in the show notes.
They were talking about their bottleneck at one point was hiring people to work in the Tesla sales centers, right? The service centers who come in and help you test drive cars and stuff like that. And they were hiring people and they had like a 3 to 4 week training where they were like watching videos and taking quizzes and learning everything about the Teslas, the cars, the products, the history of them. And they were like, man, this is really slowing us down. It's kind of expensive. We're paying all these people. We're updating all this material. And then they started questioning the requirements. You question the requirements. You go all the way down. Like, how much of this can we delete? Well, all right. Well, what if we deleted all of it? What if training was 1 day or 1 sentence or 1 hour?
Yeah.
And so they came up with a sentence, be so good that the customer wants to talk about you at dinner. Be so helpful, be so remarkable, be so useful.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is still true, but at least at the time that the book was written and the story was told, that was the training. And everything else people just picked up along the way by kind of shadowing people or doing their own research or learning as customers came in. And so people started right away, and this saved the company millions of dollars. And it accelerated everything dramatically, and it set a different cultural tone. And another even bigger one was they're starting to sell a lot of Teslas, and they were, so the service needs were going up, and Tesla does their own service rather than sending you to a different shop. And so they were like, John went to Elon and said, I need $300 million to build more service centers. Like we need to repair these things. These customers need car repairs. And they were like, well, I don't have that money. So you got to find another way. And John says, okay, well, let me drill deeper into this problem. And what they did was sit in front of a service center and they grabbed a mechanic and they triaged every car that came in. And they said, does this guy need a lift? What tools are necessary? How long is this fix? And they just studied the problem. And when they studied the problem for about a week, they found 90% of cars coming in for repairs, all they needed was a guy with a tool bag. Yeah. They didn't need a lift. They didn't have to come into the center. And so, they took cars that were that just were on the lot, and they put guys with tool bags in the cars and said, don't worry, customers, we'll come to you. We're going to bring you a cup of coffee. We're going to fix the car in your driveway. You can stay in the comfort of your home. We can schedule it. We'll take good care of you. And it turned out that was better for customers anyway. It solved the problem immediately instead of after 2 years of constructing new service centers. And it saved $300 million. And just came from this brain sweat about fighting down the problem and really scoping it very thoroughly and just thinking past, that first obvious solution. Yeah. And I think what I find so inspiring about Elon and these companies and these cultures, because not all these stories are from Elon, of course. He's not, there's tens of thousands of brilliant people at all these companies. Yep. But the cultures that he's trained and the mental models that we're talking about here have the ability to make everybody's life better all the time. Yep. Everybody wants cheaper houses. Everybody wants to deliver a better product for less. Everybody wants, more efficient restaurants or coffee shops or materials, whatever. Life gets better when we engineer better things, when we build higher quality, when we figure out how to do it faster and cheaper. We use better tools, better machines, get more leverage out of it. And so learning these things and applying them in any organization, I think, is just another tool in your toolkit for, making the world a better place.
Yeah, it reminded me of one insight or one thought in the book that I found quite interesting was when Elon was deciding between becoming a scientist and an engineer. And he talked about how my take on it is that scientists are limited by the amount of data that they can perceive, so to speak. And what an engineer does is creates things which enable us to generate or perceive more data. And so therefore good engineering precedes good science.
Yeah, I thought that was the first time I had heard that idea, and I thought that was extremely interesting. And, he points out, Galileo built a telescope. Right. And I don't remember who built the microscope, but he was real important too. And if you think about what's going on with the cyclotrons, we're trying to understand particle physics by building these gigantic, particle colliders, which is very much an engineering problem.
Yes.
Yeah. The elevation of engineering to this incredible human virtue, I think it will be a huge part of his legacy. And I think is changing the culture of entrepreneurship and the type of companies that get started. And I think it's a really healthy mix after the last couple of decades of like software bros sort of having the cultural zeitgeist, at least in the startup world.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that really resonates, I know, with construction folks, because I think there's something tremendously human about something physical that has been built or manufactured by a person or persons working together. And it's almost more human to be able to say, I built that, than to say, I observed that.
Yeah, humans are builders.
Yeah.
Humans are builders. And we're lucky to live in an age where we're building some really unbelievable and unprecedented things.
Well, there's so much more we could talk about. I want to end with one last thing, and that would be feedback over feelings. Elon's view on feedback is blunt. Criticize the work, bad news loud and early. What matters is whether someone can take criticism and improve. Give me your thoughts on that particularly. I know in construction specifically, over the years, the tendency to be blunt and direct has been diluted somewhat. Old school folks they miss that. The younger generations, they seem to be a little more sensitive. Speak to that specifically in terms of the value of blunt feedback that focuses on the issues, not the people.
Yeah. Elon says I give people hardcore feedback, but I try to always focus on the work or the outcome, not the person. He's not attacking people personally.
Yeah.
But he says like physics doesn't care about your feelings.
Right.
Like, we have a test to pass and the rocket's got to fly and the building's got to stand and it's not personal. I'm not attacking you, but I'm not going to shy away from the fact that like this is currently a failure and the expectations are of success. And there's some examples in there, and you can just Google up some of his emails in some of his dialogues. Like he's very, very clear, very unambiguous. Like, I expect this. You failed to achieve this in this meeting. If you don't improve, your resignation will be accepted.
Yes.
I'll see you tomorrow. I'm sure you can do it, and I'll see you tomorrow. And just doing this in a way that is normal and like just holding the standards. I think one of the things that I think is interesting, I respect Walter Isaacson a lot. I think, he's a great biographer, but I really hate how he ended the biography of Elon is great, but I hate how he ended it, which is basically like, yeah, he's great. He accomplished great things, but did he have to be so mean?
I know.
It was like, and it's really difficult to be that person, that leader that holds high standards for the organization, especially if those standards are, hey, we're here to do an impossible thing. I'm going to ask you to do something that everybody considers impossible, maybe even you. And one of the things I try to articulate is that I think is helpful, and at least I've found it helpful, is that Elon has high empathy at the level of the mission.
Yes.
Not the level of the individual.
I like that. Very good. That's very good.
So like, I care about you as a person. I just care way more that this team is here to achieve the outcome that we're obligated to achieve together. And everybody else is counting on me to get somebody in this role who's going to deliver. And I hope that that's you and you've got a chance to do it. But if it's not you, then I've got to find somebody else who can, because I'm here to get this mission done. And that clarity of communication without ever being demeaning, like demanding without being demeaning, I think is a tough balance. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the sort of press and people that are not in the room trying to build something don't really understand the difference between being demanding and holding that standards and like a personal criticism.
Yes.
It is the obligation and the job of the leader to hold those standards and to be clear when people are or aren't not meeting them.
And that takes us back to where we started in terms of hard work, intelligence, and courage. If you're going to be involved working on problems such as the ones that Elon and his companies are working on, and if you're going to be able to take that criticism, it takes a lot of courage. And if you're not intelligent enough or hardworking enough, then obviously working on those big problems is not the place for you. And that reminds me of his work from home email, which I really liked. I read that a few years ago, and he laid it out very clearly what the requirements were going to be. No more work from home. And if you are going to work from home, we will assume that you are stating your resignation. It was something like that, right?
Yeah. When he went into Twitter, he does a very good job of sort of, his cultures are unapologetically hardcore. He's like, if you want to be hardcore and work with us, great. But like, if you don't, there's plenty of other places to work.
Yeah, there are.
And so I think placing a stake in the ground for like, that's how this culture is going to be. And if that's the kind of team you want to play on, great. If you watch The Last Dance, you'll hear Michael Jordan talk about this too. Right. He's like, I wanted to play hard. I wanted to play to win. If you don't want to play that way, you're not going to play on my team, because that's the culture of this team. And if I don't feel like you're performing at the level or working as hard as the rest of us are, or playing to win, then like, I'm going to scare you off. And if you let yourself get scared off, then you didn't belong on this team in the first place. And of course he's domineering and of course he's hyper competitive, but that's why he's the greatest of all time.
Yeah, that's great. Eric, this was fun.
It was. Thank you again.
Yeah, no, it was awesome. Awesome. Just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how folks can get in touch with you and learn more about you, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I do. I love studying the greats and putting their most useful ideas in books for you to make your life better. All my work, my newsletter, my podcast is ejorgenson.com. You can find my blog and my investing and my newsletter, all that there. And if you want to learn more about this book, elonmuskbook.org. I give all my books away for free, the digital versions, if you want to go listen to them. They're on my podcast feed also. This is my third book. I expect everybody listening will have immediate things to apply from the Book of Elon, and I hope that these ideas serve you well.
Yeah, and just for the record, I purchased the paperback because what I'm learning or relearning is the importance of having a physical book in my hand, and I'm really, really enjoying it. So I think combine that with the free resources that you have, the free digital version, and you can get a ton out of this book. So I highly endorse it and really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us here today, Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, the physical version increases retention according to studies when you read physical books, and it's much easier to open on your desk and show somebody.
Hey, right on. Appreciate your time, man.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please give it a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. Go out to Eric's website and get a digital version of the Book of Elon. And you can also go to Amazon and get the physical hard copy. You notice I've got mine here, and mine's full of notes. Just check out this back page here. Super helpful, man. Just to get some good ideas on how to think about your business and building your company. So I'd like you to subscribe to the podcast, give it a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, share it with other people. And thanks again for listening today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.